Scene 3 of the film shifts the narrative focus away from the older women and toward the emotional encounter between Lexi and Nicole. And in doing so, the story subtly transforms from a premise about manipulation and control into something more reflective about recognition, curiosity, and the complicated process through which women come to understand themselves and one another. The scene begins with Lexi explaining how she ended up staying with the older couple, describing an arrangement that initially sounds transactional, but that she recounts with a surprising calmness, rather than presenting herself as purely trapped. Lexi speaks about the situation with a tone that suggests ambivalence, even contemplation, as though the experience has complicated her understanding of freedom, safety, and desire. Nicole listens with visible uncertainty, and the conversation between them immediately becomes the emotional center of the scene. Instead of focusing on spectacle or provocation, the dialogue reveals two women navigating a strange circumstance while simultaneously confronting questions about identity, belonging, and the expectations that have shaped their lives. Lexi explains that after being brought into the house, she was offered comfort, stability, and attention, but that those things came with conditions. Her description is matter-of-fact, rather than sensational, and the film seems less interested in the specifics of the arrangement than in the psychological implications of why someone might accept it. For Lexi, the offer represented a form of escape from a life she felt disconnected from. Her words suggest a quiet dissatisfaction with what she calls normal life, a phrase she repeats almost dismissively, as if the conventional path available to her never truly felt like it belonged to her. Nicole reacts with disbelief, insisting that Lexi could easily leave and return to the outside world, yet Lexi's response complicates this assumption. She says she has never tried to leave, a statement that introduces a subtle tension into the scene. The moment raises questions about agency, comfort, and the ways people sometimes remain in situations that appear restrictive, because those situations also provide a form of emotional clarity. In this way, the film begins to explore a recurring theme within queer narratives, the idea that discovering oneself often involves stepping outside socially approved paths and confronting uncertainty. Nicole's reaction reflects the mindset of someone still deeply shaped by those expectations. She repeatedly refers to normal life, a phrase that reveals how strongly she has internalized the belief that there is a correct way for women to live and love. Lexi challenges this belief not through argument but through observation. She studies Nicole closely and begins to suggest that Nicole may not be as certain about her own identity as she claims. This exchange becomes one of the most revealing parts of the scene, because it mirrors a dynamic familiar to many queer women, the moment when someone else recognizes feelings that one has been carefully avoiding or suppressing. Lexi tells Nicole that she can often tell certain things about people simply by looking at them, and Nicole reacts defensively, insisting that Lexi does not know anything about her. Yet the conversation continues to circle back to the same idea, that Nicole's insistence on normalcy may actually be a form of protection against acknowledging something deeper. The script includes several pauses and fragments of dialogue that emphasize hesitation rather than certainty. These pauses are important because they allow the emotional subtext to surface gradually. Nicole mentions her husband almost as a shield, suggesting that someone will eventually come looking for her and restore the order of her life. The mention of marriage is treated not as proof of stability but as a question mark, something Lexi gently interrogates. She remarks that Nicole does not seem like someone who fits comfortably within the life she describes, and this observation introduces the possibility that Nicole's marriage may represent conformity rather than fulfillment. For many viewers, particularly women who have navigated similar questions about expectation and identity, this moment resonates deeply. The film portrays how women are often encouraged to follow predetermined scripts about relationships, family, and respectability, even when those scripts leave little room for personal truth. Lexi's perspective challenges those assumptions by suggesting that authenticity sometimes emerges through disruption. Her calm acceptance of her unconventional situation forces Nicole to reconsider her own sense of certainty. The two women begin to move from strangers to confidants, not because they share the same experiences, but because they are willing to listen to each other with curiosity rather than judgment. The scene gradually transforms into a conversation about recognition. Lexi suggests that Nicole may not truly be interested in the life she claims to be protecting, and Nicole initially responds with anger, accusing Lexi of being as strange as the people who brought them there. Yet the accusation lacks conviction. As the conversation continues, Nicole becomes quieter, as though she is reflecting on the possibility that Lexi might be correct. This moment illustrates a recurring pattern in queer storytelling, where self-recognition often arrives through dialogue with another woman who has already begun questioning the same cultural expectations. Instead of presenting identity as something discovered instantly, the film shows it emerging through conversation, observation, and emotional vulnerability. Lexi's insistence that Nicole might not be drawn to men is not framed as a challenge or a demand, but as a gentle hypothesis. She treats the possibility with curiosity rather than urgency, giving Nicole space to respond in her own time. Nicole's hesitation becomes the emotional turning point of the scene. When she finally asks what it would mean if someone had kissed her, the question feels less like a confession and more like an experiment with language, a way of testing whether she can articulate feelings she has never been allowed to explore openly. The moment reflects the complicated process through which many queer women learn to name their experiences. Often these realizations begin not with certainty but with tentative questions, half-statements, and moments of quiet acknowledgement that something about one's life does not align with social expectations. The film treats this uncertainty with respect, avoiding sensationalism and focusing instead on the emotional significance of the exchange. Nicole's question signals the first step towards self-recognition, even if she does not yet understand where that recognition might lead. Lexi responds not with triumph but with empathy, encouraging Nicole to relax and simply experience the moment without forcing herself into a predefined category. This response reinforces one of the film's central themes, that identity is not a rigid label but an evolving understanding of one's capacity for connection. The interaction between the two women becomes less about their unusual circumstances and more about the possibility of discovering authenticity through dialogue and trust. In many ways, the scene mirrors real experiences within queer communities, where relationships between women often begin as friendships or mentorships before evolving into deeper emotional bonds. These dynamics can be complicated by differences in experience, confidence, and self-awareness, yet they also create opportunities for growth and mutual support. Lexi occupies the role of someone who has already stepped outside conventional expectations, while Nicole represents someone standing at the threshold of that realization. Their conversation illustrates how queer recognition can emerge through subtle cues, shared vulnerability, and the willingness to question familiar narratives about love and belonging. At the same time, the scene speaks to broader experiences that extend beyond sexual orientation. Many women, regardless of identity, are taught to suppress their own desires in order to maintain stability for others. They learn to prioritize safety, responsibility, and appearance over personal fulfillment. Nicole's insistence on waiting for rescue reflects this conditioning. She imagines that someone else will restore her life to normal, yet the conversation with Lexi reveals that normal may not have been satisfying in the first place. The film suggests that confronting this possibility can be both frightening and liberating. By the end of the scene, the emotional atmosphere has shifted noticeably. What began as a tense exchange between strangers becomes a moment of cautious connection. Nicole's defenses soften, and Lexi's earlier confidence evolves into quiet reassurance. The story does not present their interaction as a dramatic revelation, but as the beginning of a conversation that might continue beyond the confines of the scene. This restraint is significant because it challenges the common tendency to portray queer relationships as either scandalous or purely symbolic. Instead, the film treats the connection between Lexi and Nicole as a natural extension of their emotional honesty. Their dialogue becomes an exploration of how women recognize themselves in one another, sometimes before they are ready to recognize those truths within themselves. Through this lens, the scene contributes to a broader cultural conversation about visibility and authenticity. It acknowledges that society often struggles to accept relationships between women, unless those relationships are simplified or sensationalized. By focusing on quiet dialogue and introspection, the film resists those patterns and insists on portraying women's emotional lives with complexity and respect. The result is a moment that feels less like a plot twist and more like an intimate reflection on how people grow when they allow themselves to question the expectations that have shaped them. In this way, the scene becomes not only a turning point within the narrative, but also a meditation on the courage required to become visible to oneself.